Modern speed cubes seem to be packed full of magnets, but it's actually a delicate balance. You want them to be strong enough to help with your alignment, while not being so overwhelmingly strong that they actually make it more difficult to turn. But what if we threw that delicate balance out the window and really just put the strongest magnets possible into a Rubik's Cube? But how do we get the strongest possible magnets? Well, the most obvious factor that affects how strong a magnet is its size. Of course, a huge magnet like this one is going to be a lot stronger than the little tiny ones you normally find in a Rubik's Cube. Now, a Rubik's Cube needs 3 magnets inside of every single corner piece. 1, 2, and 3, and so that's going to be our limiting factor here. We're going to need to find as big of magnets as possible that we can still fit 3 of inside of here. Now, there's not as much room as you might think inside a modern Rubik's Cube piece because of these plastic supports everywhere. So instead of going with a fancy new cube like this, I think our best bet is actually to go back in time to a much cheaper, more basic speed cube like the Chi Sail W. Now the great thing about a cube like this is that the pieces are really basic and blocky, which means that there's going to be a ton of room inside to fit as big of magnets as we need. So what I'm going to do is measure how much room we have inside of all the pieces and use that to figure out exactly how big of magnets we can fit. But even once we know the size of the magnets we need, there's still another factor we need to consider, and that's called the grade of the magnet. For example, these 2 sets of magnets are exactly the same size, but these ones on the left are much weaker with a grade of N35, whereas these ones on the right are much stronger with a grade of N52. So obviously we're going to want to choose something more towards the stronger end of the spectrum while still being as big as possible and still being able to fit inside of our cube. After weighing all of those factors, I think I've come up with a pretty good option, with the added bonus being that they were pretty cheap too. Just $30 for a bunch of really strong magnets. So here they are. This is actually my first time putting my hands on them, and this is a terrifying amount of magnets to hold. You really got to be very careful to keep them away from any metal objects, otherwise they could do some serious damage to you or anything else. Just to give you an idea of how strong these are, I'm going to try and break them apart like this. So I am using all of my strength right now, and as you can see, they are barely separating, but I cannot get them apart. I just barely bent the pile like this, but I am getting dense on my hands before these things come apart. Now the grade of these magnets is N48, so again, towards the stronger end of the spectrum, and I've sized them out so that we can perfectly fit 3 of them inside of every corner piece. So now that we have them in our hands, let's try it out. I think these magnets are just small enough individually that we can pry one of them off with our fingers, just like this, and like this. We just got to be careful now about keeping it separated from the big block, otherwise the force that they come back together with can actually shatter it into pieces. It's pretty terrifying. So if we go ahead and open back up a corner piece here, you can see that the first magnet fits very nicely in, just like that. We can go ahead and hold that in with some super glue now. Next, the second magnet is going to be a bit of a tight fit because it has to go in perpendicular to the first one like this, and the polarity of the magnets means that they're going to want to push apart from each other. But if we push hard enough, we should be able to get it in there just like this. So let's super glue that one in as well. And finally, the third magnet is probably going to be the trickiest because it actually needs to go perpendicular to both of the other magnets like this. I think the easiest way to do that will actually be to glue it onto the cap. It looks like there's a tiny bit of plastic in the way of it fitting in perfectly, but that should be no problem to remove. And there we go. Now it's glued in and fits nicely. I also had to remove a bit more of the plastic from the sides here so that the cap is actually able to fit on. It'll be a little bit of a struggle to push it on there because everything is repelling, but as you can see, it does fit perfectly. We might need some glue though to keep it on. And just like that, we have a fully magnetized corner. Now the process for the edges is pretty similar, except that we only need 2 magnets this time. So the first one just goes right in the bottom, just like that. And then the other one goes in the cap, which we'll also have to modify just like before. And there we go. Now the cool thing is, since these edges aren't nearly as packed as the corners were, we can actually grab another couple magnets and stick them on top of each of these to make our edge pieces even stronger. So if this cap weren't very hard to get on before, it will be now. Yeah, we're definitely gonna need some glue again. And here's our first crazy magnetic edge. So let's try it out with the corner. I feel a little bit less scared of these magnets now that they're encased in plastic, but they should still come together with quite a lot of force. Oh my gosh, that is insane. Takes a decent amount of strength to separate them out again. And yeah, that is going to be one crazy magnetic click. Now imagine that multiplied by 4 every time you turn the cube. So without further ado, I think we better go ahead and start magnetizing the rest of our edges and corners here using our terrifying brick of magnets. Let's get started. And the world's strongest magnetic 3x3 is complete. I will say that final process of assembling the cube was pretty hilarious, but we'll get to that in a moment. But I will say that my first impression was that this cube is surprisingly heavy. Just picking it up, you'd know that something isn't normal. Neodymium is a relatively dense metal, not nearly as dense as something like tungsten, which is what's in my world's heaviest 3x3, which is actually difficult to pick up with one hand. But you know what? Let's do a little weight comparison real quick. The world's heaviest one is a ridiculous 1,574 grams, whereas a normal magnetic speed cube is something in the range of 77. So if we very carefully set this one on the scale, which it does stick to because it is metal, we get 355 grams, so about 4 or 5 normal speed cubes worth. If we hold down the scale, we can also use it to see about how much magnetic force this cube is generating against this plate, and as you can see, it is well over 2 kilograms before the cube comes up. So that is to say, the cube is pretty heavy, but the real impressive part is just how strong the magnets are. So why don't you say we try it out? Let's do some first turns here, and there we go. Now the really interesting thing that I was noticing as I was assembling it is that it has kind of a middle click at 45 degrees in addition to the main stronger click at 90 degrees. And I think the reason for that, if you can imagine the pairs of magnets right here and here, because they're so thick, they're kind of interacting with the other pairs of magnets in this edge right here. And so these ones are attracting to these ones, making this stable position in the middle of the turn. So that's really funny, something you wouldn't normally see if the magnets didn't take up the entire piece. But either way, I think we've unintentionally created something akin to the old workout cube, if you remember that. Basically just a 3x3 that's very hard to turn, except instead of using friction, it just has very strong magnets, so it doesn't want to leave its home position. Let's just try and do some finger tricks here. And, there we go. Let's see, can we do a single flick like this? Oh yeah, but it takes a lot of force. Wow. So I think the real test is, can we actually execute an algorithm on it? Let's try a J-perm. Okay, yeah, that's a little slow. Can't do our normal finger tricks. It's almost easier to just do a wrist turn. But there we go, we got it eventually. In fact, that just makes me want to try out a full solve on it. So you know what? Let's scramble it up. So let's do some inspection, and then we can begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. Now I will say I'm super happy with how this turned out and just how ridiculous it is. It's not exactly what I was expecting. I thought it would be more like one big click every 90 degrees, but the intermediate clicks make it a lot funnier and I guess a little bit more difficult to turn, which is great. Who knew adding extra strong magnets for alignment would actually make it more difficult to align? But I'm super happy with how strong the magnets actually are. I think you'd be hard pressed to make a 3x3 with stronger magnets. The only thing you could maybe do is find a cube with slightly thinner plastic in between where the magnets go, because the plastic is pretty thick on this cheap puzzle. And so that would actually make the magnets a fair bit stronger, having them closer together. But I think for $30 and about an hour of work, this thing turned out better than I ever could have hoped, and I really hope you guys are enjoying me struggle solving it right now. Let's just finish up this U-perm here, and there we go. The world's strongest magnetic cube is solved. So it's not quite as exhausting on your hands to solve as the world's heaviest cube, but I think if you just have both of them sitting on the table, yeah, this one is definitely harder to do a single turn on. Maybe you could combine these two concepts for the ultimate workout cube by filling up some of that extra space with some tungsten, who knows? But I think that's about all we have time for in this video. I really hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.